the towns in Massachusetts, they're not using Zoom, and they've been avoiding even having town meetings. It's amazing.
Oh, wow.
Wow. They can't have stopped all business.
Yeah, apparently, I don't know how they're doing it, but they're only discussing about having, in the town I'm in, which is a decent sized town, Natick, Massachusetts. Their first virtual meeting is like next week. I'm like, what?
Well,
Marshall,
but they don't have our sunshine laws,
All right.
It's true.
which
Marshall,
is a
have you
problem.
heard anything about these virtual meetings being extended from the county or from the state? Marshall,
I think he's muted.
you have to unmute.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I was talking with Matt. Hi.
Have you heard anything about the virtual meetings being extended by the state or by the county?
The inside scoop is that the governor's weighing extending for another month. Well, considers other things. So I think we're going to get a little bit more time, maybe through the month of July, maybe August, but he has not formally made his decision. I'm guessing we'll hear something next week. End of next week, he'll probably make that decision, but some people up have some lobbyists up there is pushing the governor for a month at least. So
Okay.
it should give us a little brief.
And Linelda, do we have anybody in the waiting for public comments?
No, we do not.
Okay.
That's surprising.
Yeah, particularly with the subject at hand, but okay.
We had no one pre-register.
Okay, thank you.
Well, maybe they want to see what we say first. So that's not usual.
Oh, there's Glenn. Hi, Glenn. Peggy, where is Peggy?
Somebody want to call her? I don't have her number.
Teresa may be talking to her. One second. She's here.
Ah, there we are.
Am I on?
You're on. Good afternoon.
Thanks, guys. I had to use my cell phone. How are you guys?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Wait, I gotta turn this up. Oh, you got a nautical shirt on there, Doug.
Yes,
Like
I
a
do.
skipper. Wanna go on the boat?
I no longer have my boat.
Oh, okay then.
I do miss it from time to time, though, I have to admit it. Okay, I think we're good to go, correct? So we will call the meeting to order at 1:32. Linelda, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Commissioner Shoemaker,
Here?
Commissioner David,
Present.
Commissioner Gossip Sideman,
Here,
Vice Mayor Bobby,
Present.
Mayor Hillman,
Present.
Town Attorney Tercivia,
Here.
Town Manager Labadie.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
Which it stands,
One
nation
under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
Okay, are there any additions, deletions to the agenda?
Yes.
I have an addition that I would like to make. And that is, I would like to have a discussion, rather brief, to add actually to next meeting's agenda, but I'd like to discuss it a little bit first, to look at all of the things that are on Marshall's whiteboard to discuss prioritizing them. We are currently working on things like the underground pipes, the crosswalks, obviously the budget, continue to work on various ordinances. We're not working on things like the 5-year planning, long-range financials, the town charter. These continue to get pushed off. We're working now feverishly on the 2 different union contracts. We got hit with unplanned things like the pandemic, the offshore sand harvesting. And of course, now we're going to spend a great deal of time on the fire contract. So what's occurring, and the time that I was not on the commission, but going to all of the commission meetings, there continue to be issues that come up that require a great deal of not only the commission's time, but certainly Marshall's time. And it appears to me that Marshall continues to have to make decisions on what he does with his time and his staff's time. And I think it's unfair to him because he doesn't get direction from the commission on which things he should be prioritizing. And in reality, I think that's the commission's job, setting those priorities. So what I would like to do, if everybody's in agreement, and we'll certainly open it up for some discussion, is looking at all of the things that are facing our town, not just facing Marshall, and to set some broad priorities and kind of classify these initiatives. And I would ask Marshall to just lay out, here's all the stuff we have in front of us so that we can kind of capsulize them into broad priorities. So I kind of open it up for a discussion, and maybe we start with Peggy and see what you think. So Peggy, would you comment?
Yes, sir. To that end, actually, I attached to this agenda today a synopsis of what the commission had worked on since I joined. And I did that to assist at that time, the newly appointed Vice Mayor Bobby and other commissioners with an update.
Very helpful, by the way.
Yes, sir. I just remember Greg saying at the time that was very helpful because, for example, Commissioner Shoemaker in last meeting and the meeting prior had said, gee, what about beach renourishment for us? And what about other activities? But we had looked into it in 2018. So in other words, this could be a little map to show what past commissions that I served on negotiate. I took about 10 hours and cross-referenced that at the time. So yes, I would be very willing and happy to assist Marshall with his whiteboard. And I think we might need an 8-hour meeting to address everything on there. Perhaps an 18 coffee meeting. And so I'm all for that. And if he could possibly give us an advanced list of what's on it, some kind of compilation, maybe we can think about how to handle those things or how to prioritize going forward. I agree. There are some smaller issues we could relegate to another time or place, and then let's attack the major issues facing the town, the major budget planning, the overall plan. Let's look ahead 10, 20 years. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some things that clearly must be done because they have deadlines. Certainly the budget, it goes without saying.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, John, what's your thinking? Do you think this is a good idea, bad idea? Where's your head?
Well, sir,
John, you there?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah. You were coming in a little
Yes.
delayed. I don't know why, but it is true that I don't have a clear understanding of the to-do list for Marshall as compared operationally, as compared to the strategic and contractual and major issues that we're facing. So I do think that we really need to understand both in a way to, balance our perspective on what is a priority. Because I'm sure some things that we're looking at that's really important and some town residents think are important, yet there's a couple major things that Marshall's working on that everybody kind of takes for granted. So I don't know what we are taking for granted. And I think having that kind of visibility, and I'm not saying to have a book, but maybe in 2 or 3 pages, we can summarize this on both sides, strategic and tactical, strategic and operational. And I totally support that. It would also help Marshall in understanding where he needs to spend his time with our support, because he's making, as you said, Mayor, some decisions operationally on the fly because stuff's happening.
Right.
Right. Okay, let's move it on to Evelyn.
I think prioritizing things is an excellent idea. I think that Peggy's list will help in that if things were discussed within the last 2 years and consensus was arrived at, maybe we could prioritize those further down the list and deal with issues that haven't been dealt with. And not everything is of equal importance and needs to be handled at the same time. And we have to respect the fact that Marshall is one person and Teresa is one person, and there's only so much they can do
Absolutely.
without some guidance.
No question. I think many times we overload them, and it adds more credence to prioritizing. Okay. Greg?
Totally agreed. We have been a little bit of a LIFO kind of organization. Last in is first thing we get back out, and we should prioritize it. So I'm on page.
Okay. So Marshall, I guess if anything, maybe you can divide your list up into the more operational administrative tasks that don't require prioritizing, and separate them into the basic initiatives that we can work with you on. Okay? And then
Yes,
I'll
sir.
send it out in advance of the meeting.
Yep. How quickly? Can you give me a week to put that together in some rough format?
Sure, take
Get a
whatever time
priority.
you want, just give us enough time to digest it prior to the next meeting. And obviously, this is open to comments on your part as well.
Yeah, I've got some ideas. I'd like to at least on how we format or group our tasks based by community goals. So it starts to look like a strategic plan, and we just take step by step as we can. And at least it starts to group tasks by community goal or function, if you will.
Yeah, I just would like to just kind of jump on what Greg was saying. Over the time that I've been going to the meetings and then serving, we do have a tendency to respond to the last email and the last fire that started. And we just have to stop doing that, unless it's critically important, of course. But we've got to develop our own strategic plan to develop that which is really critically important to our town. And we have to put deadlines on, and we have to accomplish tasks that we begin. Otherwise, they develop a life of their own. They never get completed. And things that are really important have to be finalized. And it's kind of that simple. Otherwise, we have all these tasks that get started and they never get finished because of all these other things that get started that just may in fact not be quite as important as they seem to be when the email or the request comes in. They're on these things, and let's do them as a group, make some group decisions, and then let's follow them through. Let's work together And it's unfair to ask you to do these because you may be doing them in a vacuum that isn't what the commission wants. Okay?
You got it.
We look forward to working. Okay, end of that. So we need a motion to accept the, we need a motion to accept agenda.
I move to accept the agenda.
Need a second?
I second that.
All in
Okay,
favor,
okay,
say aye.
I,
okay,
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. So passed.
okay, Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
So for the record, just for the record, you all were on section 4 where there's addition, deletions, or approval of the agenda, and you discussed an item. So you no longer want to add that item on the agenda, being that you've already discussed it?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarity for the record. Thank you.
Okay, move on to item 5. Proclamations, there are none. Item 6, we okay? I'm sorry, was there further discussion? All right, whoever's talking in the background, would you please stop?
That's
Thank you.
Marshall.
Presentations, proclamations, there are none. Public comments, there are none. Announcements, board vacancies, there are 2 vacancies for a 3-year term for Board of Adjustments and Appeals. Meetings and events, there's a whole slew of them. Anybody on can read them. They exist. I'll move on. Board action. Item 8, ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance number 20-003. This deals with the vacant lots, including the use of docks and piers. This is the second reading. We have all discussed this on and on. This has been on the docket now, I guess, for over a year. I'm sure everybody has read it and is fully up to date on it. Does anyone want to discuss it at all? Is everybody comfortable with it?
yes,
Yes.
Last chance if anybody wants to discuss it.
I think we've beat it up enough. Wordsmithed it enough. Looks good.
If there's no further discussion on it, I need a motion to adopt it.
I move we adopt ordinance number 20-003 as presented.
Is there a second?
I will second it.
Okay, we need a roll call vote on it because it is an ordinance.
Okay, Commissioner David,
Yes,
Vice Mayor Bobby,
Yes.
Commissioner Shoemaker,
Yes.
Commissioner Gossett,
Yes.
motion carries. Thank you.
you didn't ask the mayor.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Mayor Hillman.
Well, I guess it doesn't count because it doesn't matter. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, move on to ordinance number 20-004. This is the one for the flexibility in the scheduling of commission meetings. This is also a second reading, and I think this one has been discussed at great length. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add to it, discuss about it? Any
I do have one
questions?
question here. Yes.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure and clarify that when we voted on the second meeting of the month earlier this year, prior to you coming on board, Mayor, and to clarify with Marshall that we discussed at the time that the second meeting of the month would be not a workshop, but would be a regular meeting where we could vote. I don't believe at that time we authorized it to be optional. I don't know if this matters or if what we have going forward is a workable ordinance that the past will not matter. Am I clear? I think we just made it a second working voting meeting and not an optional. I just want to make sure that we're all together, that it is optional when needed and it is a working meeting. But if Marshall could weigh in.
Correct. The second meeting is optional and it is a business meeting.
Right, but I'm
So-
saying when we voted earlier this year or the end of last year to make it a business meeting, I don't think we made it optional.
No.
We did when we were
This was.
discussing this before.
Okay, I'm just double checking that that's an acceptable state to be in.
This ordinance makes it clear that you have one meeting on the first Tuesday of each month that you're obligated to have. And
Yes.
any other meeting is up to the town to schedule.
Okay,
Whether
so
you-
that, so we're consistent even if the original discussion a year ago didn't, this amends that original discussion then of a year ago, correct?
Yes.
Just checking. Thank you.
Also, Peggy, understand
Yes.
that this doesn't mean we can't have 2 meetings. We could have 6 if we need them.
Okay,
Exactly.
sure.
It gives
Understood.
us the flexibility to add as many as we want.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, Evelyn.
Yes,
Let me just add to that for clarity, to make sure that Peggy's comfortable and we are all comfortable, that any additions to the 1 meeting per month are in fact working meetings where we can vote on things.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
very good.
okay.
Thank
With that said, are there any other comments or questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we need a motion to move forward on this. Anybody?
I make a motion to move forward and adopt the ordinance as written.
Second,
Need a second? Okay, also, we need a roll call vote on this one.
Commissioner Gossip Simon,
Yes,
Commissioner David,
yes.
Commissioner Shoemaker,
yes.
Vice Mayor Bobby,
Yes.
and Mayor Hillman.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, there is no consent agenda and there is no unfinished business. Move on to new business. This is dealing with terminating the contract with the National Water Main Cleaning Company and entering into negotiations on a new contract. So I will turn this over to Marshall.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So what we did is we did execute a contract with the National Water Main Cleaning Company. And then when we began to meet with them to the execution of the work, in that they had mentioned that as needed cleaning, which we suspect it'll be a good portion of it, was the contract, and that a change order would be needed to do that. So we thought that was kind of unusual and thought it was incidental to televising as the project is described. So they said, nope, it isn't. We went to the second bidder out of curiosity and said, how did you bid it? They said, we bid it as an all-in, as the others had. So for whatever reason, National Water Main didn't see it because it wasn't explicitly drafted as a provision. They want a change order that's more than what it would cost to move to the second bidder. So I'm recommending that we just terminate that contract and move to the second low bidder, who's an all-in, and get this project moving.
Well done. So do we need any motions here to let you move forward?
Since you guys approved the contract, it would be to terminate contract and then authorize staff to get into contract negotiations and enter into a contract with Shenandoah. And as I said, the Shenandoah General Construction Company, we reached out to them. They're willing to hold their prices that they bid several months ago. So they're willing to honor their prices and scope of services.
So do you want a motion?
Yes, please.
I motion that we terminate the contract with National Water Main Cleaning Company and to replace it with a contract with Shenandoah General Construction as proposed.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Done. Okay, moving right along. We need to designate someone to be our voting delegate at the Federal League of Cities at the 94th Annual Conference. Excuse me. Looking for a volunteer, I guess. Who would like to volunteer? Okay, nobody wants to volunteer?
Well, I'll volunteer if no one else is capable, has time to go, since I've been involved for 2 years now and a half. But if someone else wants to take a shot at it, I'm fine with that too.
No, you're too good at it. We have to have you.
You're, yes, you're very good at it.
Oh, thank you, Evelyn and Greg.
We love you, Peggy. Thank you.
Oh, well, we love you. Thank you.
All in
No
favor, of
problem.
Peggy? All in favor of Peggy, say aye.
Favorite myself. Greg's
Strongest
laughing.
eye we've had in a month.
All right.
Appreciate it. Do we, Peggy, do you think we need an alternate? Peggy,
Sorry, you're breaking up. What was that?
Peggy, do you think we need an alternate?
If we wish to just have one on board, that would be fine. I don't foresee needing one, but who knows with what's going on this year? Who knows?
If you don't think it's necessary, then there's no need. Okay,
Sure.
let's move
Thank you.
on then.
Okay, for the record, you all, who made the first and who made the second? I didn't hear a first motion and I didn't hear a second motion.
Vice Mayor Babbage made the first motion and
I
Evelyn
second.
made the
Okay, thank you.
second. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the town seal logo. At the last meeting, we reviewed an update to our town seal. And at the end of that, a number of commissioners asked for some second generations to it. One of the suggestions were that we look at some adjustments to the typeface, to the font. And the other was the inclusion of the bird. So you're going to see some adjustments to that. So if we can now move on to the next slide, here we go. Okay, this is what we were looking at. And the focus here, let me just get myself settled. What you're looking at is the bird. We've included 2 birds on the left. Okay, here we go. Let's look into the center one. Here we have the addition of the color. So we have 3 colors in the center. And so we have more pop now with the center middle color. And we have the bird. Obviously, you see the pros and the cons. Adding the 5th color is a little bit more costly in some printing, not in all of our different printing. And it's obviously more vibrant. And Peggy, you got your bird in there. This
I got
does not
what?
change the font at all yet. The next
What was
slide,
that?
this doesn't change the font. This is still the same font. The next slide we show you will have different font. So here is that update with the bird and with the inclusion of the 5th color with 3 different fonts. On the left is the Pegasus font. In the middle is a new font. And on the right is yet another font. So let's just leave them up there. Everybody get comfortable with the 3 different fonts. You've got to look closely to start to see the differences in the fonts. You might want to focus on the G. That's probably the biggest difference. H is also obviously a difference, and the N's, you'll see significant differences. But the G is probably the biggest difference. They all kind of work.
Mayor?
Yeah, sure, jump in.
Peggy was asking that you had mentioned that the bird is now included. That was something that she brought up before.
Yeah, the bird had been excluded. Peggy asked to put the bird back in.
Right.
Thank you.
And I think that was a good idea. I think it adds a
Yes.
little bit to it.
I like the bird in there.
So do
I mean,
I.
I didn't want a boat or a dredging machine or anything.
No.
Generally on these, you want things to be clean, concise, easily recognized. And one of the problems with our current is it's too ungapachka. There's just too much going on and it's confusing. You want these to be as clean as possible. And that's why the bird was eliminated. But I don't think it's a problem here.
I
think
feel
this
bad
is
that-
still nice and clean. The font on the left is the cleanest. But I don't have any problem with the other fonts. Neither does our designer. If you want to go to what I would recommend as the second font is I would recommend the middle one. I think the one on the right starts getting a little bit too cute.
Well, not to just agree, but I like the font Creon, I guess is the name.
I
in the
like
middle.
Creon too.
Yeah, that's the best. for
I
me.
think the Pegasus, the N is kind of funky.
Yeah, I'm fine with the one in the middle. I think it's a very good compromise. I think it's very current. I have no problem with it.
Yes, Mayor, the letters that are commonly not clear in fonts are, as you stated, the G being confused with a Q or a C, and the
Right.
B with an R, and the E with an F. And I believe the Creon provides a more clear designation of some of those letters, as well as a slightly bolder white lettering.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very clean, no question about it.
Clean.
Easily recognized. It will print well. It won't bleed from one into the next.
Right.
There's no problem deciphering it.
Yep.
I think you Mayor, two questions. Do we have a cost analysis for this changeover? For example, will we be immediately including it on of course, stationery and so forth would be not a major expense, but what about the water tower, the police uniforms?
You will be very happy with the cost analysis. It came out to zero.
Oh.
My
And I
favorite.
thank you.
Because what the way this will be done is it will be done only gradually. As we, for example, when we run out of stationery, we will then use this. It'll be done on all digital, which is no
Right.
cost, and we'll only incorporate this as we start to do new things. So for
Wonderful.
example, the water tower is now due to be done. So this will be used automatically on that. So there will be no cost moving into the new.
Okay, and thank you for copying my pillow colors.
You got it.
All righty, looks great.
Okay? Everybody,
Yes, thank
please?
Thank
Right?
thank your designer very much.
We will absolutely let him know. And
Have we heard-
obviously his fees are also zero.
Thank you.
Okay,
So
done.
if I may, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
before we move off this, so you guys are approving the 5 color with Creon as the lettering.
Yes.
Could I get a motion?
Aha.
Yes, we have a project that you'll see this on the water tower at great distances and height very soon. So I want to make sure it's the one you all agree to.
I make a motion.
Is the
Yeah.
center one.
I make a motion that we adopt a new logo, the center one with the font Creon,
And 5 colors.
and 5 colors with a bird.
May I just change it? Okay, would you put it back up again, please, Tricia? Okay, it's actually a seal. It's the town seal, not logo. And it's seal
Right.
study D.
With a creek.
Font is Creon. And we will keep this for the record. Okay?
It's lovely. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, we need a second on the motion.
I'll second it.
There we go.
All in favor?
Do you need a roll call on this, Marshall?
No roll call, all in favor.
I,
Okay, all in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No. So passed. Marshall, anything else needed?
No, sir.
All good. Okay. Let's move on now to a very important discussion. Not that that wasn't important and not that the other things we just reviewed were not important, but take a deep breath, everybody. This is the fire rescue issue. As you all know, you all got the information from Marshall about the Delray Fire Rescue wanting to add 4 more individuals to our fire rescue team and add the cost to our contract. That cost would obviously escalate over time. It would originally be partially funded by their grant. That grant decreases over time to the point where it would run out, and I guess it's 3 years, and be fully funded by us for those 4 individuals. The first year, it would result in an increased cost to our contract with them of 10.3%, which is obviously unsatisfactory and totally unacceptable. If they desire putting more personnel into the fire station located in our island, they wish to do that, they do have operational control. They certainly can do that, but not at our expense. Now, we need to approach this without emotion, and it's very difficult because doing this results in an emotional response from us because it's wrong and we can't allow it. But we have to approach it logically and we have to approach it strategically because the services that we get from them is top-notch. There's nobody that disagrees with the quality of the service that we receive, but it can't be at a cost that is just sky high. And we have to mitigate those costs. So I believe that the vote at the commission level in Delray to accept this grant was 3-2, meaning 2 people did not want it and 3 did. So obviously they went for it. And that grant was for 8 firefighters. I don't believe that they were looking at the big picture of what their longer term financial issues were going to be. They voted for this in early May. In the midst of a pandemic, they had to know that they were looking at longer term financial issues. They were going to put a lot of pressure on their operating budget. Just as we're looking at financial pressures on ours, but theirs is even greater because much of their finances are based on retail taxes. But anyways, they voted for it, knowing that it's going to run out and they're going to have to support much of those costs. Whether at that time they thought they were going to lay half of it off on us or not is almost immaterial. But in a conversation that Marshall had with their chief, telling him, listen, this is unacceptable. I don't no, but I don't think our commission's going to want to accept this. And he turns around and tells Marshall, well, I don't think our commission's going to want to eat it. They'll probably cancel the contract. Well, I don't believe that the three that voted for it were thinking down the road, the long end game here, that if in fact they did cancel the contract with us, they would have to eat over $5 million in revenue. They would lose use of a hook and ladder truck. They'd lose the use of a fire station, lose the use of a rescue truck. They'd be eating all this on top of having financial problems to begin with in their town. So I think that our reply to them at this point should not jump to the legal issue of, we have a contract that says 22.5, you can't just do this and charge us. I don't think we jump to the legal aspect yet. I think we reply to them that we need to have a financial discussion with you about this and take our time through this, approach it as business people, not emotion, not legal. And at the same time, I would like to task Greg, as vice mayor, and as our financial expert on our commission, to talk with the three people that voted for this, to share with them what their financial ramifications are going to be if in fact they decided to vote to cancel the contract. I think Greg could have a very good financial discussion with them one-on-one. And I'd like us to spend some time during this meeting to start developing the talking points to help Greg have that discussion. I think that would be step two. Step one, send a response from Marshall requesting a discussion about the financials of a 10.3% increase and what the effects of that might be. That would buy us some time. And step two, having Greg reaching out to the three people that voted for this. And we must do that very quickly because they have meetings coming up where in fact they might just vote to cancel the contract. That would buy us some time and hopefully get them to think more broadly and think down the road about what the impact of all this might be. I open that up for discussion and maybe we start with Evelyn.
Well, see, my brain immediately goes to, we contracted for 22.6 and we contracted for 22.6.
Well, it's 0.5, but I think my point here is not to start with legal issues. Let's start with business issues. You can always do legal at the end.
In that case, I think that it makes sense to point out to them that they may not have looked at their financial future when deciding to do this. And they may not have taken into account that we may not want this or need it.
Yeah.
You know, because then they're left with everything.
And they got a big hole, a huge hole. I think their operating budget is around 34 million or something like that. I mean, to eat another $5.5 million, that's a hit. That's a big hit.
I mean, the bottom line is we can't afford this, period. We just can't afford it. Our budget doesn't have that kind of flexibility.
No. No, our answer is no. But as opposed to just saying no, let's get a dialogue going on this thing. Let's start a negotiation and let's use Greg as our lead with the three people that voted for it without thinking through the ramifications of this and the long range end game.
Right, but he has to speak with each one of them separately.
Yeah.
Correct. Which is good. You want to develop. anyways. You can't talk to them together anyhow, nor
Right.
would we want to. I mean, I'm assuming, Greg, you would do it. Would you be comfortable doing that, taking that assignment?
Of course, I'm happy to do it. I mean, it's a pretty direct conversation, as you said. I actually agree with you. You shouldn't approach it from the legal standpoint. Maybe the first standpoint is a little bit more of the inversion technique of, hey, here's the situation we're in. Here's our thoughts on it. Here's the financial aspects of it. Have you guys considered this? It doesn't even have to be it can be a dialogue that kicks off some thoughts on their side. It doesn't have to be a jamming of.
Right.
But I mean, I'll share my general thoughts on this whole thing. Just stepping back, I was a little surprised that they were doing this. Kind of feels like we're adequately staffed, if we're not maybe overstaffed, considering they're sending a lot of the guys at our department to a lot of other responses outside of our town. It feels a little bit like they kind of got themselves into a jam with the previous town manager, DeJesus, and you know, they kind of just tried to back into it and see who could absorb the costs. But we've got to be, and I appreciate the mood music there. That's pretty good. We got to be sensitive to, we just voted for a hiring freeze. And we just talked about not taking on any additional personnel expenses. So it's a little bit strange to even be considering this from our standpoint anyway, from what we just all agreed to. So yeah, I'm actually very good with your approach. If that's what everyone wants me to do, I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Peggy, what do you think?
This is my third time looking at this contract, and I've prepared a couple of pages of statement I'd like to read because there was a lot to consider. So I'll read that if that's all right with everyone. And I can copy everyone on my comments afterwards. And my feeling is that one simple word for this is no, for this amendment. And this is a time of uncertain property values due to COVID-19. And who wants to inform the residents that their taxes will likely be raised for the next 5 to 6 years? And who wants to walk down the street and look them in the eye and say, sorry, we have to keep raising your taxes? I don't see any end in sight with this contract because it's been raised every single year since 1988, with the exception of one. A few years it was raised 10%. Another year, 16%. Back in 92, it was raised 43%. I don't see that we are ever going to get out of the contract being raised. And we have no seat at the table. We have no controls. We do not have built-in cap. We do not have any kind of a seat at the table. And I don't think this is fair to the commissions, both us and those in the future, or the people of Highland Beach. In 2008, Highland Beach property values decreased 5 years in a row, and taxes were raised every year, year after year, based on the fire contract as being a majority of it. What will the tax hike be? Let's say it's $500 increase per 100,000 in appraised value. That's going to be $3,000 on well, let me finish the math here. It's going to be $3,000, $5,000 for 2 million townhome. And this is not fair to our residents. It's a hardship for retirees living on fixed incomes and our working couples and families with mounting bills and less work in the COVID-19 crisis. I don't feel that we're protecting the residents' finances. We are not protecting their lifestyles or helping them lessen the worries in the pandemic. We're adding to it by saying, well, we're gonna have to raise taxes again. I don't see that this contract will ever really level out, and the fee increases year to year are disproportionate to the services we are obtaining. We are obtaining basically the same services. And so I'd like to consider this. Last June, I requested Matt and Marshall to calculate the 10-year figures for the existing contract last year. It hadn't been done before. In the 10th year, the cost would be 7 million according to their figures, for a total of 51.6 million for a 10-year contract, averaging 5 million a year. Now those figures are increased to 8 million and 54 million over 10 years. That's a hike of 3 million overall in just 1 year. Services, they're primarily the same. Their last fire on record was the garbage truck fire last spring, and before that, it was a kitchen fire in 45 Ocean. Thankfully, we have not suffered great fire emergencies. However, we're paying for them with our ladder truck, which was a $1 million cost originally, but after the 10-year lease, which we will own it at the point, it will have been a $2 million cost. More than 50% of the time, the Highland Beach station answer calls in Delray Beach and Gulfstream. I don't feel we should be fighting fires in Delray or Gulfstream. There was a time when a resident fell at the library parking lot. I reported this last year, and I was visiting with Mayor Feldman. He called for our ambulance, but it was out on another call. He waited for service from another station for some time. The building design for fires. I don't know if everyone knows, but 30% of our buildings are not accessible to the ladder truck due to landscaping design and building design. That should be discussed going forward. There's a mutual aid agreement. This is a neighboring municipality providing backup fire and rescue services by Cooperative Emergency Response Management, which is a standard of the industry. If we have a large fire, the stations from County, Boca, Delray, they do respond based on the mutual aid, regardless of contract or anticipation of need. Already we have that in terms of ocean and an intercoastal rescue and hazmat teams and so forth. So I was hoping if you would like to take a short walk through the business of it with Greg's work, with Marshall's ongoing work, but I think we should also authorize Town Manager Labadie to research alternatives, perhaps a medical transport ambulance. A majority of our calls, a high majority are medical transport, discussing that. I'm sure he has ideas. Hopefully he's looked into things already, and also investigating setting up our own fire contract. We have a 3-year out. If we had voted last year, we would be only at a 2-year out right now. So I'm urging my fellow commissioners to consider taking the 3-year out and investigating options while we have discussions with Delray Beach. But I do not think it's fair to continue going through this renegotiation every single budget season and finding that our costs continue to climb to astonishing, and to this year, to me, a shocking amount. We have no control over this contract, zero control. And I was also considering asking Marshall to see if our attorney for our union contracts, Jeff Peterson, would be able to work with our city attorney on contract options, since a vast majority of this contract is personnel and pension, and that is his expertise. Lastly, I was researching the codes and the statutes online, and I did locate a statute that says this, Florida statute: no separate legal or administrative entity created by an interlocal agreement shall possess the power or authority to levy any type of tax within the boundaries of any governmental unity participating in the interlocal agreement, to issue any type of bond, obligate financially a government unit participating in the interlocal agreement. I believe Mr. Labadie did say that we would have to agree to this to make it a viable contract option, but I can't even imagine. I don't even know what people are thinking. I just think this is a big no, and we should look at options, please. This is just not the right way to run our town, with no control over the #1 highest charge in our budget. Thank you.
So you do not want to respond to the strategy that we're talking about?
I don't mind taking on the strategy you're discussing, but I urge my fellow commissioners, because this is the 3rd year I have gone through this, I urge them to take a hard look at the next 5 years. I don't think we can afford 10 or 12 million. I don't think we can afford to keep going back to the table every year and clawing our way through these fees when our services remain the same. I feel that we're paying a disproportionate amount overall. And I think we have to look at that overall strategy. So yes, please, I don't mind taking the smaller steps, but I think we have to step back and look at the big picture. I have a 12-inch thick stack of research from my past years, and I don't see any way of continuing this contract for 5 or 6 more years. I sincerely urge we take a 3-year out, but in the meantime, while considering this as a commission, still reviewing and speaking with the 3 commissioners in Delray, if you wish, looking at options. But if you'd been sitting in this chair for 3 years, I think you'd be as exasperated as I've been by seeing this.
Fully understand. And
There's no end in sight, no end, no control.
Peggy, I fully got you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't mind the small steps, but we have to step back and look at the big, big picture.
I got it.
Thank you, Doug.
John,
So, Mr. Mayor, I think in response to what you're trying to do, you're saying that rather than jump to a legal contractual conflict, let's focus first on the business side of what we should have as an agreement that benefits both us and Delray. To do that, you're suggesting that the vice mayor have some discussions with those 3 who voted for this safer and the reasons why they did it.
because all we have to do is turn one of them.
Well, yes, but I think it's also important to know why the other 2 voted against it, which is kind of interesting. So whatever we can learn from the reasoning used by Delray, the 3-2 vote behind their decisions to vote the way they did, that would be really critical. And so if the vice mayor can find out the motives, the thinking behind that would be great. But your point is, let's first, as the council here, decide on the talking points for Greg to have that conversation before we then go on with the rest of our strategy on how to deal with this mess. Okay? And I'm sorry, say again.
That's my proposal. I want
Yes.
us to develop those talking points.
And I think that's an excellent approach here. I don't think we need to go into what the solution has to be or else kind of thing. And so as I look at the talking points to support a strategy of first understanding why they voted the way they did, and then trying to explain to them what we need to know about their decision process. The first point I would make right off the bat is that all of a sudden we get this notice and we were not involved. I mean, clearly the collaboration that you would normally expect on a multi-million-dollar arrangement was absent. Secondly, the safer deal, we weren't even considered in that deal either. We had no input to it. So now we're trying to find out about this after the fact, which is part of the reasoning for Greg to go to the Delray folks and say, hey, first of all, you kind of shocked us, you surprised us, we're not involved. And on top of that, you made a vote, didn't consider us. And I think we're a significant part of all of this. Another point in the talking points is the difference in the populations. I mean, we have from a range of 3 to 8,000. Town manager, Marshall, you had mentioned that their population is more like 20,000.
70.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say way more than 20.
Yeah,
70,000.
70,000.
79.
Which right by population alone is a dramatic difference. And yet we're getting nailed with a big percentage. So then the question is, in the talking points, how did you come up with this justification that we're paying this kind of money, given the relative size and the kind of support that we're getting, and that we're quite happy with. So that's the next talking point is that, by the way, guys, we're happy with what we have today. We don't need another fire rescue personnel person today. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, but we certainly don't need them for the next few years because we think we have top-notch service today. And we expect that will continue because our population isn't changing, which is the other talking point. Unlike Delray, we're almost built up. Our population is not going to dramatically change. Yet, with the kind of build out that's going on in Delray, they're going to have a whole lot more people, and the population is going to change. And then we move into the next talking point. They've got to be hurting by millions of dollars based upon the pandemic, the closing of Atlantic Avenue, their malls, and then the beaches. It's a nightmare. So they've been caught short. Fortunately, you know, they're going to see some recovery, but it's not going to be enough because here's another talking point. I did attend the webinar on Monday morning for the League of Cities, Florida League of Cities. And, you know, just in 2 months, they're talking $1 million shortfall on the governor's budget and on revenue sharing. Revenue sharing is going to be cut by millions. And that's going to make a big dent in everybody's budget. And we're going to have to cover it somehow. And so Delray is looking at a big hit in all of this. And I'm sure they had to be listening on Monday. This was the first notice that the red flag, the shot across the bow that said, the governor's hurting on cash. And so we're all going to be so, and this is going to continue for the rest of the year for sure, and into next year. That is the prognosis. Another talking point is what I think Commissioner Peggy brought up, and that is the historical trend has been very negative and has been placing an undue burden on Highland Beach. The next talking point would be, what is the justification that they used for adding the additional fire rescue personnel?
I can answer that.
What's that?
I can answer that.
Yeah, well, but we don't necessarily agree with it, but we got to hear their side of it and saying, well, how did you include us in that equation? Again, I think that,
And
you know, whatever
you know
percentage.
better than most.
What's that?
As you know better than most, you have to understand your customer.
Yes,
And their rating is a 1, best you can be. And to help secure that, they want to have 3 men on a truck. We're 2.
right.
By putting additional people on, they then are at 3. And this will help maintain their rating. And that's the purpose for it.
But again, that is their rating. But why is it that we're the ones that have to provide such a strong piece of their rating?
Well, because we are one of 6 stations. They don't look at just us. Remember, we are one of the stations within their system. We are just part of their system.
Right.
We look at us as Highland Beach, period. They don't look at us that way. We are just part of their system. That's part of the problem. That is not part of it. That is our problem. Goes back to Peggy.
You're absolutely right.
Peggy's
They are maybe viewing us. I'm saying they may view us as 1/6 of everything then, or even more. And that's
essential.
the obvious last point is the cost, the due diligence needed for reviewing their costs here, because I looked at the cost. I mean, it's everything from, you know, we're paying for a big increase in their retirement. We're paying for increases based on, and I thank you, Marshall, for sending out the Palm Beach newspaper about the increases. Then they're getting a bonus. Even the town of Delray knows it's a big problem with what the firefighters are looking for. $82 an hour pay for special events. $82 an hour. So that's already caused a lot of people choking in Delray's council. So I think this whole thing is literally a situation where the town of Delray has been in disarray for so long, and they're financially in a mess. And we cannot be viewed as, somehow an ace in the hole for them. Anyways, I wanted to at least address your question about talking points off the top.
Thank you.
And I hope I try to do that for Greg in his initial conversations.
You hit a few very good ones there. I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, these things help? You
Yeah.
got a good list?
Without a doubt, I wrote down a lot of those comments, so for sure.
Okay, and here are the 3 individuals that voted yes.
Okay.
Boylston, Johnson, and Frankel.
Boylston, Johnson, and Frankel.
Correct. Boylston is the vice mayor. The
Mhm.
other 2 are commissioners.
Right, I'll work
Great,
with
you have it.
Marshall to get their contact information and reach out.
Okay.
Do we know who originally brought this up to their commission?
I can give you some background.
Please.
The driving force was the union was a major factor. And DeJesus was a major factor. And
Sorry. Shush, 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 shush.
Boylston was the driving force on the commission.
Okay. Got it.
Okay?
Any other talking points anyone wants to suggest? Or go ahead, Marshall. What do you have?
Marshall, you may have some things to add to this.
Sure. When we do reach out to it, they had made mention, I know DeJesus had mentioned it once to me in passing. And last year when they presented what they call their budget projection to us, they mentioned their desire at some point in time to seek a 3-person rescue. So they said that that was sometime their goal. They were waiting to get their commission on board with it. From listening to the May 5th, 2020 meeting was from the Vice Mayor Boylston, was they had implemented 2 phases prior to his election in 18. He wanted to go to the 3rd phase and get their last 2 stations in. However, the commission at that time hadn't approved it. And by reading the tea leaves and watching that agenda, it appears commission never revisited approval, yet it appears staff sought and obtained the SAFER grant and hired the individuals, again, as the mayor was saying, as the cleanup, and then approved the grant after they had already hired. They hired 13, only 8 are covered by the SAFER grant. Again, we did tell them that it's a hard road to travel here, based on some of our previous discussions at the FAB and with the commission. I told them that's going to be some hard sledding. And what I'm getting to that a little bit, I know you may have received something that I vowed something that this would never happen. They were on time. I said they'll be on time next year, which they are. They're just presenting something we didn't like and were asked to approve or participate, going to that collaboration issue. I think that's been probably what has hindered our relationship over the last 3 years, is that collaborative effort and coordinated action concept has not really been deployed fully when you have a partnership, which is critical. And the last question that I might have is, I know we're going to, through the vice mayor, reach out to them and they're going to have conversations. I did hear Mayor Hillman at the beginning, you said you wanted to send a letter. I will send a very obtuse letter, if you will, basically to them at the same time saying that we really don't have a desire to amend the contract as requested. And I'll give them some broad strokes of the pen from this conversation as to why, mostly our fiscal concerns and sustainability, and maybe some disproportional nature of the cost to service provided, and then kind of leave it there. And then maybe say, you know, if there's an interest to collaborate and look at the contract in its entirety, or I'll frame it up so it's even looser than that or broader than that, that, you know, that we wish to continue the relationship either under original terms or terms that are more proportional to the service provided, financially proportional to the services rendered, and kind of leave that broad stroke there. Is that generally what I'm hearing, or would you like to tweak that?
Basically correct. Exactly.
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Sounds
Shall
good.
in this letter identify that Vice Mayor Bobby will be reaching out, or just let him do that in his own course of time? Foreshadowing.
I would think so.
Makes sense.
To not to, yes or no to include it?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just be perfectly clear with my fellow commissioners and anybody that's watching or listening. This is unacceptable. Their request is just plain unacceptable. And we're going to do the best we can to mitigate it. Is that not correct?
No.
Fully agree.
Totally.
Okay. Okay, good.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
the only thoughts that might give Vice Mayor Bobby a little more background is this whole idea of going from 2 to 3, what's commonly called level of service in the fire industry, has been ongoing for 15, 20 years. This has been a union objective for the last couple of decades, department by department. So I heard someone else mention union driven. No doubt, that's the driving force.
Got it. Thank you.
Mayor?
Is it-
Sure.
Mayor?
Yeah, please.
2 things. If Mr. Torcivia could explain, or Marshall, what actual increased services we would get from this level 3. I was under the assumption that aside from getting additional bodies, additional firefighters, who I will repeat are fabulous people. This is not about the people, it's about the paperwork. But the level 3 does not really increase our service level. It does not make the town safer or the fires lessen or a better service of medical rescue. I believe it's more of just a bragging rights. If the attorney could maybe weigh in on that. And then secondly, if we could let the commission and the people watching understand what our contractual rights are, what our seat at the table is. I believe we have no control over these figures for the next 5 to 6 years. If we could answer those 2 questions.
I will tell you what I've heard union representatives say. I'm not saying
Yeah,
they're
Sure.
accurate or not. Their position is always that having a third person on a rig or a truck when it goes out is safer than having 2. That's their talking point. My perception, my thoughts is that if you have a business and you can expand your population of dues paying business members by a third, instead of having 2 employees on every truck, now you have 3, you pick up another dues paying member, it's a business. So I'm maybe more cynical, but that's the way I see it. Although I've certainly heard the unions talk about how it's a safety issue, and their buzzword is level of service. It increases your level of service because you're going to have 3 firefighters out there responding to a medical emergency. For example, you can have 1 driving the rig and 2 in the back working on the patient instead of 1. Those are the kind of arguments you're going to hear. But the cynic in me says, I can increase my business by a third at no cost to me.
So for the past 30 years, we can effectively say there would not have been any safer response having had a third person for those 30 years.
Right.
I couldn't say that because I'm sure there'll be various studies out there Because again, this has been a trend for all over, certainly the state of Florida and Palm Beach County
Okay.
Fire Rescue for years. So there
Okay.
are arguments on both sides of that issue, whether it's safe or not.
Okey doke. And then if you could address the state of our contract negotiation seat, do we have any control anywhere in this contract with capping fees, anywhere in the contract?
As the mayor indicated, I think you don't want to make it a legal issue, but to me, your
No, I
contract
know.
very clearly says you're paying for 21.5, whatever number it is. And I don't believe they can unilaterally increase and say, we're going to give you 19 people or 25 people. We contracted for a certain number of people and we agreed to pay based on the in-rank salary of those people. And, you know, think about it. If they could unilaterally do it, why would they seek an amendment to the agreement? I think they recognize that there must be an amendment that the parties agree to change the terms of the contract. The contract's very clear. You're paying for 21.5 people at the average in-rank salary. You know, again, I don't believe we have the ability to go back and say we want 18 or we want 25. We can say it, but you have to negotiate it.
Do we have any control at all in this contract, Len? Any control over the cap of fees year to year? Any controls?
No.
Any seat?
Well, certainly that your cap is the number of people that they have. They're what they're trying to do. I don't believe they can do under this contract unless you agree to this
I
amendment.
understand. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Glenn Tosivia, it certainly may be too soon, but I'm just trying to get an idea, not saying we need to do anything now, and I think some of this we don't need to do in public discussion at this point, but are there any contractual traps here as Greg goes into this that we should, be mindful of?
I would agree with you that that's not a public discussion.
Okay.
Good answer. Okay, let's move on. Peggy, let me just address your point on the 200 truck versus 300 truck. If I may. The motivation for the 300 truck versus 2 is to help cement their #1 rating. That's the commission's motivation based on the input they get from the chief. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
yep. Okay, can we move on? Are we done with this?
I think we were done with it.
Twice? Done. Okay, let's move on to item E, which is a discussion on the dredging. And Peggy, this is yours.
Yes, sir. Revisiting this from last week, 2 weeks ago. Once again, I've drafted up some comments and I can copy them to my fellow commissioners. So I'd like to just skim and read them. Right after the last commission meeting, I sat down and reviewed the comments of Mr. Thompson, the engineer, and thought about how we could move forward or not. And I wrote down 3 words: communication, coral reefs, which is actually 2 words, and attorney. And these are my thoughts. And right after I wrote those down on a sticky note, actually, I had communication from 2 residents separately that basically said the same thing. So I thought, well, maybe this is a good way to go. So first, as you discussed with the fire, actually I call this my earth, wind, and fire year. Earth being sand, and being hurricane season, fire being the fire contract. So earth, wind, and fire.
Not germ.
Yeah, cue up your music, Marshall. So seriously, we should continue communications with Boca Raton and Delray Beach about the sand dredging, because it's not really Highland Beach versus Boca Raton or Highland Beach versus Delray. It's really sand belonging to the state, and we're all the state. And we need to look once again at the big picture. Such as, what is Delray's dredging doing for Gulfstream or Boca Raton? Or what is Boca's dredging doing? And what impact does it have at Highland Beach or Hillsborough Beach? We really could speak to the Boca Raton mayor via our mayor or their council, where they've invited us in en masse. And it would be historic to continue our communications and sharing of information. We have studies, they have studies. They've already paid for these exorbitant engineering study fees. So I think we should remain open to resident comments and continue communication. And I do want to say to Boca Raton, apologies, because they did give us advance information of this, which was lost in the shuffling of 5 different town managers in the last 11 years. So they did do their due diligence and let us know about this, as Marshall has said. Next to the coral reefs. Mr. Thompson spoke about his decades of experience with oceans, sand, coastlines, and he underscored how we have enough sand to last another 40 or 50 years. After that, who knows? And he spoke about how government agencies have lengthy permitting process through many different factions, and they're just not handed out permits willy-nilly easily. On the other hand, there's environmental groups, universities, and private groups, many citizen-backed, who claim that dredging does not help our coastline and our beach problem. In fact, it impacts us negatively. And I looked into this through some online research. I copied the key points and the, which you'll see on the agenda, and some of the key issues for everyone to reference. And of particular interest are the studies at FAU and University of Miami following the dredging of the coastlines. There are even some agencies such as Florida Fish and Wildlife, NOAA Fisheries, the EPA, PAST, and the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, which all are public agencies which do not agree with dredging. So we have to take them into account and their opinions. The University of Miami is unbelievably in the forefront of the science of this, and they take issue with many, many different Southeast Florida coastline operations. The Army Corps did enact the Clean Water Act, and yet I'm not sure that it's always followed. I'm not an engineer, but I don't see from some of the online research that it is always followed. Certainly in Southeast Florida, we have lost somewhere between 40 and 60% of our coral reefs in the last 40 years. What happened? Some say, well, it's chemical runoff from landscapers. Well, that might be true. Towns such as Palm Beach and the town of Tequesta, the village of Tequesta, have banned use of fertilizers during the rainy season when it's washed into the waters. And then there's people who say that there's a sunscreen component that actually helps to aid algae growth and compromise the ocean water. So I was thinking we should invest in some time and locate someone who could bring these issues to the commission and discuss the environmental impact of the dredging. Perhaps it's not good for any of us. Perhaps there won't be any sand for our kids or grandkids. There are some people who say there won't be any sand for us in 20 years. Maybe we should be saving it for a major storm event, not just every time Boca Hotel runs out of sand. Let's bring it out of Highland Beach. And that leads us to the attorney. Many voices in town are calling for us to hire an attorney. And this is being a strategy. So once again, I researched some case law on this. There have been a lot of companies, private, public, and governmental, who have taken the Army Corps to court. They get sued a lot. Many cases were determined to have no merit. Some were ruled in favor of the Army Corps, and still others were found that the Army Corps dredging and other businesses were in fact in violation of federal laws. Some of those found in favor of the plaintiffs were Alaska, determined that the Army Corps violated its own Clean Water Act by running equipment through some of the tundra that was protected. A Houston, Texas homeowner group successfully sued the Army Corps over Hurricane Harvey water management. And in Ohio, most similar to our situation, there was a settlement, a legal settlement of the Army Corps dredging Cleveland Harbor and Cuyahoga shipping channel and dumping the sediment into Lake Erie, which clearly harmed the ecosystem and was proven. So these cases took a lot of time, money, effort, personnel costs. Do we want to jump in and sue Boca Raton? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way we want to go. We need to continue the conversation, but let's look at some of the items that claim that the dredging is harmful. Some of them state that it alters the ocean currents. It causes greater levels of wave action, which erodes the beach, particularly at the south end of town. It kills turtles who might be trying to escape the dredging and actually swim right through it. And it harms the ocean systems that cannot up and move. A school of fish can move to a non-dredged area. Coral cannot, anemones cannot. So they are impacted even if they're not dredging at a reef. Sometimes the lines are pulled over them. Sometimes the wind or the currents might move the ships. This does happen. And there is a strong lobbying effort, again, for the dredging machines. If you know, the one that was offshore here came from the Great Lakes, which in the winter time, when they're dredging down here in Florida, they can't obviously dredge in the frozen Great Lakes. So they need somewhere to go and some work to do in the winter months. I encourage everyone to at least scan some of the comments I've listed online, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the counterproductive efforts that dredging does to our coastal resiliency. And when discussing this with Marshall, he came up with a great idea. I have to credit Marshall, if he could weigh in here, where if we did hire an attorney, we might be able to look at a different approach than going to court. Maybe we could be advised on taking a position, an opinion, a resolution on our overall environmental stance for the town of Highland Beach. We're something like 1 square mile of land, and we're over 10 miles of coastline in Highland Beach. I documented it. Canals, lakes, the Spanish River, which runs east of Bellito, the ocean, the intercoastal. We're more than 10 miles of coastline, and let's start taking care of that. And so Marshall, could you possibly weigh in here to project some of your ideas about how overall we perhaps need to look at adopting an environmental and a coastline stance, which I thought was brilliant, I have to say.
Sure. Just to let everyone know, yeah, we had a conversation, really started around, hiring an environmental attorney, lawsuits. I expressed my concern to sue a federal and state agency.
Right.
I believe would probably surpass our $350,000 threshold if we really wanted to go after it, which then would trigger the need for a referendum to do it. And it's a sizable sum of money that even if we stopped at 350, that's another $350,000 gap we're going to need to in our budget or jump into reserves. But my guess is when you sue the Army Corps and state agency based on the premise of science and engineering that's been in place for a long time, our costs are going to be monumental to go point counterpoint for all the prevailing science that's in place that allows it to go. Even though there are studies that say that, yes, there are some environmental impacts, and we're seeing those environmental impacts. And that really gets to potentially where the Army Corps and DEP have been potentially short-sighted on sustainable approaches to how we manage our resources, looking at that long-term and then balancing that with the economic improvement to put in these larger beachheads. So what I suggested we might want to consider, and this is where the discussion would come in, is either we can pass a very strong resolution or we could send a very strong letter to the governor and all of our legislators, very specific to this issue, pointing out the short-sightedness or potentially some of the issues of how coastal resources are currently managed, and focusing on what Commissioner Gossett-Simon said on coastal resiliency. This is a very big, hot, well-funded topic, and it's from the top down. The governor is really pushing for this blue infrastructure or blue economy focused on improving our water resources. So if we know that continuing this dredging activity does have a harm or an impact to our coral reefs and potentially to our nearshore environments, why do we continue to deploy the same strategy, the same mechanisms to permit, enforce, and or approving such large withdrawals that, you know, really aren't sustainable actions when in 50 years that resource is finite? It's kind of odd that we allow big draws of a finite resource. Usually you keep control of that because you know it can't replenish it, or the time it takes to replenish is so long. It's not truly a renewable resource. Why are we allowing it to be drawn out in 50 years? And then what? Then how do we begin to protect our resources? Or we have to then go inland to truck in and really warp the future, which goes against sustainability, which is, you know, protecting what we have for future generations. This action or process doesn't seem to align with that. So we would hire an environmental attorney that's really attuned to statute, really specific statutes, to draft up a very strong positional letter that there are problems here and that we as a smaller town are going to be harmed by this now and in our future generations in the long term. And we need to rethink this and take a real hard approach to getting this to the governor, getting it to the DEP, getting it to all of our elected officials. And then when we go to Tallahassee every year, we again redistribute this to other legislators and get it to other local governments, and they start to join on, and we create a movement that we get communities, and that's going to be that pressure from the bottom to the top saying, yeah, this isn't going to work. We might get other small towns to agree with this, or even potentially larger towns that are offshore, borrow pits are gone, and what do? Or they only have a limited amount left and some other towns coming in. It'll keep us from fighting our adjacent neighbors or those neighbors in adjacent counties from coming down here to get matching sand. Maybe we take that position, because I think a lawsuit and a referendum really to go to the mat with the Army Corps and the DEP, that's, and I'll let Evelyn talk about legal fees. That's a huge cost, and we won't be able to do it. If there are some private benefactors that wish to go after it, and we can lend support to them because they can financially handle that kind of scale, more power to them. But I think if maybe we spend a little bit of money, get a very well drafted position, this letter then could spawn into a resolution that we act. So it could be twofold. And then that kind of begins to establish our sustainable decision-making process moving forward. So when we make decisions, we begin to think of that long-term. We think about the environmental consequences of our action. So every time we make a decision, we have a resolution that says, is this good for the long-term? Is it a sustainable action? And it kind of is a call for order for us that when we take these steps from purchasing to business decisions, we somehow think of it from a sustainability approach. So we're going to start acting locally on this global thought or this regional thought. And then we send a strong letter, and we do this every year. Get that letter out to every legislator, get it out to local governments. When we go to the Florida League of Cities, hand it out to our friends and colleagues. We can make a presentation of our call to action. The Florida League of Cities will allow us to make a presentation to other communities. I think it's more a proportional approach, something that we can afford to do. And it tends to building a coalition to take action. You do a better job to get the legislator to move, at least the state to move. Getting the federal government to move may be more monumental and longer term. But again, DEP kind of takes a lead on some of this stuff. So, that would be a good approach, something that would be more palatable financially for us. And again, I don't think this is a letter that's quickly written out of with my pen, but somebody that can reference statute and studies and be very specific, very well written to that call to action on the problems we see. We might have, a good course to start building a bigger coalition of adjacent communities and communities around the state. Because I hear a lot of them talking about this stuff. So, it puts us in a leadership role or a partnership role with others. And maybe we get that action we want, because it is, the window isn't tomorrow that it closes, it's down the road. So we need to do something now and kind of start getting that momentum towards that sustainable action.
Right, thank you. Absolutely.
Okay, let's get some thoughts from the fellow commissioners. maybe start with Evelyn?
Marshall is right. Litigation is very expensive. You sue governmental agencies, they paper you to death because they can. And you never know how much a litigation is going to cost because you don't know where it's going to go. So I think that would probably not even be feasible at this point. I don't know if it would ever be feasible. I think getting the Florida League of Cities involved is a wonderful idea because there's more impact with numbers. Us just doing it on our own is fine, but I don't know how big a voice we're going to have. But if we can partner with other cities, and it's not just the ocean. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go on the intercoastal and on the canals. And I mean, those things we have a little bit more control over. But yes, I think it's time to come up with regulations and protect, because the future is going to be here sooner than we know.
How about this group that we're members of? I forget the name of it, but it's.
Oh, along the coast.
Yeah,
Right, coastal resiliency, right,
Isn't that the perfect venue for it?
absolutely. I agree. That's the point, that this dredging is counterproductive to the efforts that that group is being put forth. And I just don't know that everyone's really thinking in that mindset. We're not really looking at the overall big picture
Or wouldn't it be
from
the-
8 miles up.
Isn't this the project that they should be taking on?
I think we could leverage that group to move it forward because it's, our issue is going to be a little more specific to coastal than inland, but that coastal resiliency group and the project that they're deploying will add a lot of credibility to it because that group is predominantly funded from the DEP, saying, what are the problems? Well, because we started looking at this, I mean, it all starts to tie together where if we take and make a strong positional statement through a legal letter that says, here are these issues that we need to begin to address. And then in that letter, we could also say, we're doing our part by joining the Coastal Resiliency Partnership. Here are the things that we're doing. We need your help because these things are short-sighted or don't fully take in a sustainable approach to our environment and nearshore habitat, things of that nature. It adds energy to it.
Right, absolutely.
We should do the letter, not the Coastal Resiliency Group do the letter.
The Coastal Resiliency Group might be, I gotta find the right adjective, might be a little too far on one side of the equation and may not speak fully for this commission or how the commission would want to present its concerns, if that makes sense. You've been to the presentation. I know a couple other.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Greg, John, do you want to jump in here? Either one of you?
All right, John, you go first and then I'll go.
Okay, well, I think it is an interesting approach. I would definitely, as you've heard me speak in the past about litigation, avoid it, avoid it, avoid it. And worse, and this with the Army and the government. I'm sorry, Mayor, you said something? No?
Well, I'm saying we don't want litigation.
Yeah. So I think what you're suggesting is let's get an environmental attorney that can advise us and create kind of a campaign that we can pursue to recruit others, partners, to deal with this problem that really is going to affect all the coastal towns, whether it's on the actual ocean side or the intercoastal side. So I think that approach is maybe a little more tangential rather than a direct attack, but I certainly think it's worth not only the money to understand this better with the environmental attorney, but to also get his or her insight, suggestions on how to proceed. Greg?
Okay. Greg, anything?
Sure. I'm going to pick up right where John left off. So I'm said it a few times before, I'm a big fan of bringing in an environmental attorney to consult with, not to go sue Boca Raton, but to figure out what are the unknown unknowns and how to navigate them. I'm fine with the letter avenue and that sort of stuff, as long as we're getting an environmental attorney to kind of guide us through it. That is certainly the more ideal path. I don't personally see any lawsuits ending up in our favor that we can afford to stop any sort of dredging. I haven't seen any killing of dredging programs before on that. So I think we all just got to be realistic in what are the results we're trying to get. But if the group wants to hire an environmental attorney, I'm certainly on board with that. And if we want to go the letter writing campaign route, that sounds fine to me too.
Okay. Nobody's going to be happy with what I'm going to say. But Marshall, put it on your list and we will prioritize it.
I will make it a priority on our list,
Next
yes.
meeting. Okay.
Doug, I have a question. What do
Yes.
you expect an environmental attorney to do as opposed to an environmental specialist?
I don't know. That's what we'll discuss once we set a priority on it. And when it comes up, then we'll kick it around and we'll fully develop it. And maybe it ends up being an environmental specialist, not an attorney. But I don't know where it's going to stand on the priorities. So it might be something that we don't even tackle for 6 months. But I think we've all agreed that Peggy's research has shown that it is something that we should be considering doing. But how we attack it, how we expand it, what it includes, what kind of budget we put against it, all that needs to be determined yet.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay?
Mr. Mayor, could I add one thought?
Is right on. We really hasn't even explored what it contains. But I think the point that has been brought up by Peggy is certainly valid. And I think the commission has certainly shown that it wants to get involved. But to what degree, what the parameters are, what the budget is, all that is yet to be developed. But why spend any time on that until we set it in priority sequence? Okay?
Mr. Mayor, if I could add one closing thought?
Yes, of course.
Yes, thank you. I would point out that our ace in the hole is the coral reef system stretching from Indian River County to Key Biscayne all the way to the Key West and beyond. That is our ace in the hole. Some of the lawsuits that went nowhere with the dredging were on the west coast of Florida, which does not incorporate a reef system offshore. And so much of our beach erosion in the south end of town is right akin to where we had some sand dredged out. And I just want to say that that coral reef is protected by a 1999 act of Congress. And that's our ace in the hole.
Yeah, please don't get me wrong. I'm not at all suggesting it's not important. However, the town can't do everything, and we have to set priorities on what we do. And as a community, we're obligated to determine what things we work on.
Right.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
You're not done yet, though. Maybe we've already discussed it to the degree we have to, but that is the piece that you put together for us all on the business that has been reviewed already from March of 2018 through June of 2019. Is there
Yes,
anything
sir.
you wanted to add to that discussion?
No, sir, not really, in the sense that we discussed it in the opening of this meeting. I did want to provide it based on the Vice Mayor Bobby's comment last year stating that it assisted him, but some of the issues that we're facing now were looked into in the past, recent past, and I just thought this was a good guideline for our current commission and our public, if they're interested, to look at some of these dates and some of the efforts of us in the past so that we can build on it, change it, whatever course we want to take. But we were very busy for a while, and this gives us a sort of a guideline of just where we have been and where we need to go.
I have a
Very helpful.
question.
It also shows that many of those things were discussed many times as well.
Yes, well, that's something we would like to avoid, hopefully, in the future.
Let's learn by the past a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Good point. Absolutely agreed. Yes, sir.
For sure. Yeah, Evelyn, you had something?
Yes, I want to know what some of the resulting decisions were on these topics, or was there any decision?
Yes, some of them were. Yep.
Decisions.
There were, and I can provide that at the next meeting with a quick synopsis of a few lines of each one if people are interested, if the commission's interested.
Were there anything specific that you wanted, Evelyn?
Well, variances, they're not specific what it is. I know we did Airbnbs and vacation rentals. We talked about beach and beach access.
Yeah, I can answer that. They ended up not finding them.
Right.
I mean, you and I kept saying we have one here at our development that's available, but the chief knew about that.
And did we determine if every resident in town has beach access?
We did not. Go ahead.
Greg, you had some information on that, Greg? On does the resident have beach access?
I have information regarding the area around Bellito, which they actually have multiple access points. But I don't know about the northern ends of town. I know a lot of the homes over there do have deeded access across the street, but I'm not sure if they all do.
Gotcha. Marshall, do you have any knowledge of that?
I mean, I don't have all the deed and title work in front of me, but I believe, if not all, nearly all have access to the beach. And on the north side, you have the Beard Beach Group. They have access coming down through that area. You know, the condo groups all have access. Bellito's got access, Boca Cove. So I can't think of any properties that do not have access that I haven't spoken with in some fashion over the last 2 years that, you know, hey, this is our access point, this is ours, but I can't confirm legal right without going through all the paperwork, and we have not done that.
Fair enough. Anything else, Ed?
Not right now. I mean, it was just curious, because if you discuss something but no decision was come to, then it wasn't laid to rest.
Got it.
And a decision that there's nothing that can be done is still a decision.
Yeah. I mean, just from going to commission meetings, I know many subjects were left open. Just sitting in watching the meetings.
Yes, I mean, there were some that were just, you know, kicked aside essentially. But there were others that came to decisions that should be left alone for the moment anyway, until we find out that they were really wrong decisions.
They'll come back and bite us. Shall we move on? Jake? Done? Okay, move on to commission reports, updates. Start with John.
I don't really have anything a question. And in light of the conversations about priorities and so forth, this may not be a top priority, but I would ask the town clerk Do we have any idea who are veterans in the beach? And if not you, maybe the town manager would know. Has there ever been an effort to understand how many we have and who they are?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right. Because I was thinking longer term that maybe we could do something for the veterans if there was a significant number in town. But I'll have to find another way of understanding how many we have and whether it makes any sense to do anything. All right, that was my only question.
Owen?
I have no report at this time. Thank you.
Yay. Peggy?
No other report, thank you.
This is going very quickly. Greg?
No report.
Great. My turn. I'm pretty well talked out. Moving on to Glenn. Glenn, you with us?
Sorry about that. Very briefly, we will check your code on the change with the new logo seal because section 2-1 does define the seal, but I don't think you need to change it because it just talks in general about concentric circles. So I don't think there's going to be a need for an ordinance change. Just wanted to let you know that we've been looking at that. And then just a general sunshine law public records update. We've seen an uptick in, complaints, text messages, emails. So just be careful with your emails, text messages. Certainly, to avoid communication among yourselves. But one common place that people seem to make an issue or make a mistake is hit reply all. So just avoid replying all if there is something that goes out. Staff is sending an email out to the commissioners and they're responding to that staff. Just respond to that staff member. So just in general, just keep track of all these. I think I've had more public records lawsuits in the last 3 weeks. I don't know what's going on. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up.
Glenn, question on seal. Do we need to copyright it or trademark it?
I was going to look into that. I'm not sure if you do or not. I don't know that we're ready. I was going to ask Marshall afterwards if he's aware if we've ever had a trademark for that. I know we've done that recently for another city. So that was something we'll look at too now that you're adopting the new logo / seal, whether we need to trademark it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Marshall, I'm sure you have nothing to report.
Nope, all good. Just want to, we're waist deep wading through the budget process. We're working feverishly to get that stuff ready to make our initial presentation to the commission on July 2nd. So we'll be running right up against the clock as Commissioner Shoemaker had mentioned, the governor is trying to figure out with his financial team how bad it may be or what we would expect for the sales tax issues as that relates to revenue sharing and some other sales tax revenue sources that we get. So we're trying to anticipate those losses and then, how we're going to bridge the gap with, covering our natural escalation costs on the expense side. So we're working hard on that, worked with staff all last week. We had one-on-one meetings, went back through everything. So we should have everything in place to present our initial brush at it and then begin to formulate our decisions on if there is a gap, how we plan to bridge it or either fix a structural deficit and or look at reserves, things of that nature and combinations. Very similar to last year. I just think the numbers between the two will be a little bit greater, unfortunately. But let me finish penciling out our revenue side of the equation and we should be good. The auditors will be on site tomorrow, so we'll be wrapping up our audit. For those that are watching, it's been a very slow process for an audit when everybody's in COVID and not working and trying to obtain records from state agencies and working through the audit when the auditors can't camp out. So it's taken us a little bit longer, but we're still on schedule and meeting all state obligatory requirements as that may be. So really we're into that time of season, which is the budget. So as we get a closer look, I'll let you know. Again, crosswalks has always been a hot topic. I think we're gonna look at, I got some more conversations I need to have with our engineer, and there may be some alternatives to doing something as we discussed, a little more direct, owner furnished equipment, and then get a contractor to do installs. We just tread lightly with FDOT to see that they give us the approval to scale back the project so they don't require some of the other items that were stipulated in the permit. And then I'll start working on prioritizing all these projects. One of the projects we did look at last week as a group, we really spent a lot of time on capital projects. So keep that in your head, that as much as it gets difficult into this budget season, we still have some obligations to maintain our infrastructure, both built and built assets for the most part that we are obligated to maintain. So we're trying to come up with the most effective capital strategy. But again, we can't just shut it down. So we're looking at how we can make it a little more effective and fit into the budget a little bit better. Other than that, we talked about what has been taking a lot of my time today. So we'll keep on keeping on, and we'll get to the end here. Thank you.
Question?
Greg, want to go back to you for a second? I got a copy of it, but obviously the rest of the commissioners didn't. Would you just update the commission? You had looked into our outstanding loans and the rates to see if there was any saving on refinancing, and you finally got the information. So could you just update the group, please?
Mayor, I couldn't tell if you were talking to me or not. I think you were talking to me.
Yes, I was.
Yep. I don't have an update yet. I did get the information. I'm part of the way through it. I'm not fully through it. There's a bunch of the loans that the rates are so dang low, like 1 or 2%. It's not worth those. But there's one that may have a prepayment penalty. So I'll dive into it a little closer, and then we can discuss it the next time. There might be one possibly, but most of them, there's nothing to do.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll hold off for the last one until next meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor,
Somebody wanted it? Yeah, go ahead, John.
just a question for the town manager. I was just wondering, given all of the acrimony going on, what's Chief Hartman doing with his police team?
Yes, you did get a, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up. We spend a lot of time talking about it, and it's good to have you reflect upon that letter that Chief Hartman had written to you all, emailed to you all. A lot of the concerns people had over on how use of force is deployed here. All of our practices are up to the best practice standards, and we don't deploy those type of techniques. We look to de-escalate at all times. I think naturally by the composition of our community, we don't have too many situations where we find ourselves in a highly escalated environment on a regular basis. But we are committed to the best police force in South Florida. So we train on a regular basis. We update those policies on a regular basis. Chief Hartman's team understands the concept of community policing, and we deploy that at all times. And again, we continue, or Chief and his team continue to look at policies to make sure what we do is the best. And that's what the residents of Highland Beach deserve, is nothing but the best. And when it comes to police protection here in the town. So other than that, I know, I think if you want to know, the president did something today on he passed an executive order. I think he banned chokeholds and did a few other things. I haven't seen the details to it, but I would encourage everyone to look at that to see what kind of progress is being made at the federal level. The other issue I want to say, you're hearing a lot about COVID. I kind of telegraphed that last time, that a lot of it is hitting us on in our agricultural communities and in West County areas. Those seem to be really increasing cases for COVID. And also we're seeing it through the central corridor of Palm Beach County, that being from Lake Worth, moving west into Green Acres, Lantana. They're having an uptick in cases. It's a concern to the county as they continue to watch it. So community spread is here. This is stuff you've already heard, but our cases are increasing. Luckily, hospitalizations we're keeping a close look on as a community of communities as a county and as a state, making sure hospitalizations don't jump up. But I would really take the moment to encourage everyone. We can't stop doing the preventative protection, hand washings and social distancing. Be very cognizant of that because we are seeing an uptick. So what Dr. Alonso has been saying is community spread is here. It's not letting up. It's going to be present through the summer and into next year until potentially a vaccine is in place, which, it depends on who you read, that sometimes it's close and then sometimes it seems to be further out than we anticipated. But keep washing your hands, wearing your mask when you circulate into close quarters. If you're not feeling well, stay home. All those things we have to continue to keep an eye on. Again, emergency orders still are in place. I have really no direction to tell you to cancel, even though ours is kind of mirroring the county at this point in time. Because the numbers are upticking, we kind of keep an eye on that. And I don't see us changing service levels at the current point until either the numbers begin to flatten, we get a better handle on the types of cases we're getting, make sure hospitalizations don't jump up on us. So, but again, the agricultural communities are really taking a hit right now. And we have, the county has been working with Martin County, Hendry County, and Collier County. So basically Immokalee all the way up to Indiantown, where they move the migrant workers from fields to fields, seems to be the area of concern, and putting them on buses, and they're concerned to trust government agencies, and how they form their message out in these communities has been a big concern for the county. But the numbers are ticking up, and that's a concern. So we're keeping an eye on that. I'll let you know if anything jumps off the page, but everybody that's watching, please continue to practice those safe measures. It's going to help us all in the long run.
So a follow-up question, Marshall, given the situation with May, Broward, Palm Beach County, and now Central Florida with COVID cases increasing, I guess, pretty dramatically, where you might have an influence at the county level, it would seem to reinforce what the mayor had brought up in the very beginning, that we really don't want to have town meetings anytime soon where everybody goes into the town hall, at least in July and August. I just don't see where that makes any sense. And that you emphasize the fact that we're different than maybe Tallahassee and others that aren't seeing the increase in COVID. Although I guess the governor is stating that our cases are increasing because of testing, but our deaths are not out of control. I guess we only had 8 deaths yesterday or over the weekend. So anyways, where you might have an influence, that would be something to consider.
I think as a managers group, all of us city managers in town or in the county, our concern is at least give us the flexibility with these digital meetings. Because if we get us into the chambers, we really can't get enough space to not only facilitate us as a group, but to get the public in there safely. So I would just encourage those that are watching at home too, if you want to participate, we just have to be registered 24 hours prior to the meeting. The wonderful woman you see on your screen there, Linelda Gaskins, just give her a shout or an email. She'll get you into the meeting so you can participate in public participation. So we can be a big group online, and it's probably our safest situation, the safest environment at this time. But we'll see in the next week if the governor is going to give us that flexibility. If not, we'll squeeze in, and maybe we can't really facilitate a lot of public. So we'll do our best with it.
Okay. Anything else? All clear? We will adjourn at 3:33. Thank you all. And
Thank you, Mayor.
Stay safe.
call me if you
Everybody
need
stay
me.
safe.
They said,
Thank you.
All
Stay
right.
safe.